All right, we are live. I'm actually pretty excited about this right now. This is the second time I did a stream last night for WrestleMania to just do a quick coverage, but this is my second time going on YouTube live. So let's hope that this turns out okay. And the subject, essentially, what I want to talk about today is video games. I want to talk about video games and the impact that they've had on my life. I thought that this would be a great topic for a lot of gamers because I don't believe I've seen a lot of this stuff online yet. At least I haven't seen people really cover it like that, and I believe that it's an important thing to cover. So I want to talk about one of my gaming experiences as a kid that I felt had a tremendous impact on my life. And if anybody at any point wants to join in on the conversation, feel free. That's why I'm doing this live, because I want this to be as interactive as possible. And if nobody joins, it's okay. You can lurk, you can watch, just have me on in the background. It's like white noise or whatever. It's fine either way. Makes no difference. I just wanna get this out there, and I'm basically doing a mini series with my podcast. So for those that don't know, the name of my podcast is Neo's Corner. And up until this point, I've been doing the podcast with a guest, sort of a la Joe Roganish kind of style, but I haven't really been able to get guests on the show like that. So I figured it might be a good idea for me to just have topics to talk about, because the podcast has to keep going, right? The show must go on as always. So that's essentially what I'm going to talk about. So on this edition, we're going to do this little mini series on video games and how they've impacted your life. And there's one game that I want to talk about specifically that I played at a very young age. It's called Illusion of Gaia. As you see, I have a little image right there about the game. And I want to talk about the importance of the game and what it did for me and what I felt the impact of that game was on my life specifically. The game Illusion of Gaia, it was created by developers Quinlet. Publisher was Enix. Now they're Square Enix here, but they were Enix at the time. And it was released in Japan November 27th, 1993. Then it was released in North America on September 1st, 1994. So we got this game a year later here, as we typically tend to get. This was on the Super NES. Super NES is a console that I had as a child, and the importance of this game, I can't stress the importance of it enough, because what this did was essentially teach me how to read. Right? So I wanna kind of unpack that a little bit. And so essentially, when I was a kid, my brother, he was really good at reading. He's my older brother, and I never got the hang of reading when I was younger. He would always read these video games for me. He would try to teach me how to read, but I wouldn't really pay much attention. I would kind of just like, I was a slacker, even as a kid, I was kind of a slacker, and it's not a good look. I'm definitely a lot different now, but at that time, I didn't really have an interest for it. I always liked that he was very animated. He would do all these different voices, and through these voices, he kind of brought the characters to life, because back then, back in 94, we didn't have games the way they are now, where they're fully voiced by, you have like these really good voice actors that are doing these voices for these games. I didn't have any of that stuff back then. We had to read the games, and if you couldn't read the text that was on the screen, you couldn't progress through the game. And that's just kind of the way it was. We didn't have guides, we didn't have internet the way we have it now, where you can just like see somebody play it and just copy what they're doing. It was a different ball game back then. It was a different monster, and times have definitely changed. So he pretty much got sick of reading it for me, and I don't blame him, because he used to have his own books. He would have like a little stack of books that he'd have by the corner of his bed that he would read all the time, and he loved reading. And he told me, hey, look, honestly, I love you and everything, but if you don't start learning how to read or trying to take this more seriously, then you're never going to get to finish playing these games. So what he did was he took a love of something that I had, which were video games, and he told me that I would be denied the pleasure of experiencing them through their entirety if I was not able to read. So at that point, I kind of started taking it a little more seriously. I would be in school, I would try to pronounce words more properly. When I would play the game, I would pick up whatever I learned in school, and I would try to read the game best as I could. If I had problems, he would come up to me and he'd tell me the words. If I asked him, if he saw that I was really trying, he'd be like, okay, this is the way you pronounce the word. And then he would try to explain pronunciation and the way the words are said to me, which was something that was alien to me, and even now as an adult, I know how to read just fine, but I'm more like a mental reader. Like if I sit down with a book, I can read it in my head just fine, but if I try to read out loud, I still can, but I'm not very good at it. I kind of feel like a fool trying to read out loud. Even though I'm not horrible at it by any stretch of the imagination, I'm not necessarily great at it. So when I do my streams online and I play a lot of games, like I play a lot of the old Resident Evil games, I have a habit of reading all of the text files that they give you, and I read it out loud for the whole stream in its entirety so they could see that I'm not completely illiterate. But yeah, it was interesting because now at that point I knew that I couldn't progress unless I started reading. And I read and I read and I read, and before I knew it, I had a base understanding, a very base understanding. I still wasn't very good at it, but now it was kind of getting to the point where I was able to progress through the game a little more. Sorry about that noise. I was just putting the arms to my seat down so I could be more comfortable while I'm doing this. It's kind of nervous. Yo, what's up, Jaden? How you doing? Why I'm streaming on YouTube? Because this is the podcast. This is Neo's Corner, and I'm doing a little mini series about video games. So right now I'm doing this on YouTube because I want to keep the podcast a little separate from Twitch. Occasionally, like if I have a guest, I'll try to actually, do it on Twitch. But if not, I'm just gonna, if I'm by myself and I'm doing talks like this, I'm basically just gonna do it on YouTube because I kind of wanna dip my toes into different platforms. So that's what I'm gonna do. How are you doing, by the way, my friend? I hope all is well with you. If you have any questions, you can feel free to ask. I'll answer them as long as they're pertaining to the topic. Yeah, so I don't remember how old I was at the time. I don't want to go through the mental math. Let's just say I was probably like, I don't know, 7 or 8 around the time. And yeah, I found it weird that so many people in my age range, they knew how to read so much better than I did. I was never a very good reader. And because of my desire and my will to want to play a video game, it changed my life. It did. I started taking school more seriously, and I started telling myself, you know what, this is boring, but I at the very least need a very base understanding if I'm gonna like make it anywhere in life, And yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. So your question is, how did RE impact my life? Oh man, Resident Evil. I am gonna do a full blown series on Resident Evil as well at some point, but I will, for the sake of this topic, tell you about how that affected me as well. So Resident Evil, I played it back in 1996 when it first came out. I remember at the time I was living in the Bronx, and my friend, he was really good friends with the Super, and the Super, he always had like all these video games. He had like a buttload of them, all of them. Whatever you can imagine, he had it. And he had the Japanese PlayStation with the Japanese version of Resident Evil. So we got like super early access to it. And I remember it was me, my brother, my friend, and another friend of mine. We were at our Supers, and he had like this really nice basement in the Bronx, and that's where he had like everything set up. So we sat there and we started playing it, and he was like, "Hey guys, I want you to check this out." So we start playing it, and instantly, it was insane. Like I was afraid because at the time, games like this didn't exist. You didn't have survival horror the way you have it now. Now, granted, you had things like Alone in the Dark, which Resident Evil was like highly inspired by, especially with like the cinematic camera angles. You had kind of like a security camera angle feel going on with that. And yeah, we started playing it, and I remember how eerie it felt and how real it looked. By today's standards, that game looks like crap, and which is why they remade it, because it didn't hold up too well. But at the time, that was the scariest game that ever came out. You know, you have to understand that. So we started playing it, and I just remember how we couldn't get anywhere because the tank controls were so horrible. We didn't understand the concept of like 3D controls. And you know, the characters moved like tanks. You know, you would use the left and right to spin the character around, and you would press up to move them in the direction that they wanted to go, and you would press back so that they can move back. But up was essentially every direction. And although people will kind of like crap on tank controls, realistically at the time, tank controls were necessary for that specific type of game because of the constant changing of camera angles. And if you play the remake, you'll see what I'm talking about if you try to use like the alt controllers. The alt controls that they give you where you can kind of move freely, however, it's good, but there'll be times where you're moving up and then the camera angle changes and suddenly you're moving down if you're still holding up. So at the time they kind of had their purpose. But anyway, so we played it, and when we saw the very first zombie, I remember it went to the cutscene of the zombie chewing up Kenneth, and then he just like drops his head, because it was like the Japanese version, so they actually showed like the head falling, and then the zombie just turns around very slowly and eerily and stares at us. So we try to move, and we got killed by the first zombie. As I'm sure a lot of people did when they first played it, because I don't believe that at the time anyone had a real grasp on those controls. Now then again, I was a kid, so maybe it was just my inability of playing it correctly, or you know, maybe like teenagers or adults got the feel for it a lot sooner than I did. But I know that all of us, we all tried and we all died with the first zombie. We didn't know that we had to step out of the door and have Barry kill the zombie. Although you can actually still kill the zombie, it was recommended to let him kill it, because if you ended up killing the zombie, he would still be there when Barry would when you would go back to Barry. So yeah, it made it a lot scarier just for that simple reason, because you couldn't move normally. So it was sort of unnatural, you know, like everything was off, the voices were off, like the music and the environment, like you knew something was going on. This had the classic like B horror movie kind of feel going on. But what changed things for me with Resident Evil specifically, I would have to say the fact that it kind of helped me conquer a lot of fears that I had. Because when I was a kid, I was always afraid, man. I was scared of everything. I just remember, like, if there was like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, or It, or Halloween, Jason, like all those movies, I just remember being so frightened. Now granted, I was a kid and I probably shouldn't have been watching them, but I just remember having nightmares off of that experience. And I remember when I started playing Resident Evil and I started getting the hang of it, the nightmares went away. And they went away because instead of me just watching as a spectator and not being able to do anything about it, now I had control of my destiny. And I kind of feel that that's very important, because, you know, when you're watching something, you're very passive. You're just in the background. You have to just accept what happens. This time you have to work to survive. You have to solve puzzles. You have to conserve ammo. Your inventory is limited. You know, if a monster's coming after you, you have the option to destroy the monster or run away from it. So the power is in your hands, you know. The power is yours, as Captain Planet would say. And it helped me conquer a lot of fears. So I remember I would watch movies like Nightmare on Elm Street again, and now suddenly I wasn't scared anymore. I didn't have that very real childhood fear of the unknown, because I was experiencing the unknown. And you know, that was really good game. I remember we would play it at my friend's house, and he would put on the Cranberries soundtrack, and he would put the song Zombie every time we would play the game. Not every time, but he'd do it on certain occasions. As we were like shooting zombies, you would just hear them saying zombie, zombie. And I remember that being a lot of fun. When the first dog burst out of the window in that room that was inspired by The Shining, the hotel in The Shining, that was like ripped straight out of there. We were shocked. Like it was that first like real jump scare of the game, and I just remember shaking. I got goosebumps. We were nervous. We didn't know what to do. The dog killed us too. But after a while, you know, you adapt to the style. You adapt to what's happening, and you overcome, you persevere. You know, that's just something that you do. You get it out there, and it helps. And to me, video games, I like how as an adult, you know, I'm in my 30s now, and I probably have more of a love for video games now than I did back then. You know, we all go through phases where we're in and out of things, and you know, certain things just kind of stick with us. And video games have definitely stuck with me in a way that is very profound. You know, like I mean, I live stream video games. I'm doing a talk about video games on this podcast now, but it also educated me. You know, like some of the most important lessons I've ever learned in this life that we live right now, that I live, because I'm the main character of my own world. Some of the biggest lessons I ever learned were from people that don't even exist. You know, you had superheroes, you had these video games where you had to overcome things. Illusion of Gaia, which was the game I was talking about originally, it taught me how to read. You know, that was an education that I had a difficult time attaining in school, and through sheer will of wanting to complete something that made me happy at the time, I learned how to read. And I think that's something that enough people don't stress. They don't put enough importance into that. And I always tell people, you know, it's like, hey, like, let them play the game. You know, you never know what you might get out of it. Let them read that comic book. Let them watch that cartoon. You know, cartoons especially, they're so amazing nowadays. They have some, you know, you have some dud cartoons. You have like silly cartoons that aren't meant for anything serious, but you have some cartoons that are very, very adult in nature, and you learn life lessons from it. You know, like even a show like Naruto, for example. Naruto, I think, is a textbook example of of uh of being able to care about people, to care about friends, and care about the people in your life. You know, like that character personifies hope and the desire to never give up on people. And I believe that that's a very important lesson that you learn from a cartoon. You know, so some of the most awesome, amazing, inspirational things that I've gotten and I've done in my life have been because of those type of lessons. You know, because of those underdogs. You had Spider-Man in like the 90s. I remember on Fox Kids, who he was a very real character. You know, he lived in New York City. He lived with his aunt. His uncle had passed away. I had an uncle that passed away when I was a kid. You know, and he was broke. He didn't have any money. He had a struggle. Like he would be solving crime and then at the same time trying to make sure that he took photos of himself so that he can, he can sell his own photos back to his boss and pay his rent, basically, because his aunt was old and she, you know, she couldn't really do much. And I was able to resonate with stuff like that because even at an early age, you know, my mom, she had, you know, she had suffered through a lot. And you know, I kind of had to like man up at a very young age. And that's why I have this like hustle and drive that I have now, because these are things that I don't want to experience again. You know, it can be a very bad experience when you're young and you feel like there's no hope. And I guess that's why, like, maybe that's why I was so distracted when I was a kid. But when I played Illusion of Gaia, like I said, I haven't played that game since that time. I never revisited it, even though I wouldn't mind. Maybe I'll do a retro stream of it one day. But that game taught me how to read. That taught me how to read. That's something teachers in school couldn't do. And now, granted, by no means am I saying that video games are a replacement for education. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want that type of heat. But you can definitely learn a lot from different sources, from different media, from different outlets. You know, if you have trouble reading a hard-covered book, you know, a book with just pure text and no pictures, no illustration, you know, you can always read a comic book. And now the comic book has images, and maybe you might want to know what's happening in those images. So you got to read those little text bubbles. You know, I read a lot of comic books also as a kid. And, you know, even my vocabulary, I remember at the time, as a kid, I had a pretty high vocabulary just because of shows I was watching. Like I started watching Star Trek, I remember. And, you know, Star Trek, they speak in a very advanced way. So at that time, I didn't know what half those words meant. I was super clueless. I'm like, I don't know what any of this means, but I learned. I learned. And then, you know, I would start using these words in my day-to-day vocabulary. And then I remember I had gotten the nickname 411 because of that. As a kid. Just give me a second. I'm gonna take a sip of my water. But yeah, you know, how did video games impact your life? You know, I know how they impacted mine, and I feel that they're always going to be in my life in one way or another, whether I'm playing them, whether I'm reviewing them, whether I'm just talking about them like I am right now. They're always going to be a main factor in my life based off of the experiences that I've gotten off of them. And what I'm hoping to get out of this mini series is kind of dive into all the, not every game I've played because we'd be here forever, but rather I want to get more into like the influential games, like the ones that I felt had the most impact on my life. And I'd love to hear the games that had an impact on your life as well. You know, so again, like having in the yellow bar in the bottom, maybe you have questions, you can always ask at NeoStarling. That's my Twitter handle. Hashtag Neo's Corner, which is the name of this podcast. And you know, like, let's just do it, man. Let's have this conversation. I would love to have a dialogue, be open about this topic, because again, it's something that maybe I just haven't noticed it, but I haven't seen it really covered like that. And if it is, you can always feel free to correct me. Also in the comments below, you can always tell me how what your experiences are. If you don't want to like go on Twitter and you just want to simply leave a comment, that's fine as well. Somebody's honking their horn outside. Sorry about that. But you know, just let's hear it. You know, let's hear it. I'm not gonna stay on too long because, you know, I just kind of wanted to get this out as sort of a pilot for this miniseries, and you know, I'll advertise this and hopefully we'll get some engagement, and that'll be dope. So tell me below, comments below, if you were feeling this video, hit that like button. If you thought that I was worth a subscription, then hit that subscribe button. It'll help me because the overlords in YouTube are telling me that I'm not worthy, and they're telling me that I can't monetize any videos of mine because I'm not worthy. So yeah, let's just do that. You know, I'm not very good at this. This is like me trying something different. I'm freeballing this. None of this was rehearsed. I just had this idea from watching WrestleMania last night, and this is something I thought I'd want to kind of do. And I'll get into the topic of wrestling as well, because I love talking wrestling, video games, comic books, you name it. For the most part, I can talk about anything. So yeah, again, I've been NeoStarling. You guys are awesome, and don't ever let anyone tell you different. Signing off.